In this episode of Filmmaking for Noobs, we'll be looking at how to shot list. More specifically, if you are a director and you're going to be directing a film, whether short or long, why is a shot list important, how do you shot list, and what things should you keep in mind? Shot listing is important for a few reasons. First of all, it helps you to make sure you actually get the shots that you require. The way that I shot list is I actually edit the film in my mind or on paper ahead of time before I even shoot the film. I know exactly when I'm going to cut to each shot, what shots I require in the final edit, and because of this, it helps me to shot list so that I know exactly what shots I need, what I don't need, and it helps me to make sure that I get everything that I want for my cut so that I don't end up in the editing room weeks or months later missing important coverage for a scene. Secondly, shot listing helps you plan your day. Providing your AD with your shot list ahead of time helps your AD to figure out exactly how much time each scene will take, and it helps your AD to keep you on track. Also, providing your shot list ahead of time to your script supervisor will allow that person to also help you make sure that you don't miss anything. And third, it helps everyone else to make sure that they have all of the equipment and everything else that they require in order to give you the shots that you want on the day. Providing your shot list ahead of time to your DP will allow your DP to make sure that any special camera gear, lighting gear, or grip gear has been booked and is ready to be used when you're ready to film. If you don't shot list and if you don't take the time ahead of time to properly convey your intentions to the rest of your crew, then you're likely going to find yourself in a situation where you don't have the gear that you require. If you were wanting a Steadicam shot but you didn't tell anyone you were wanting a Steadicam shot and all they brought was a tripod, well, that's on you. When you're shot listing, many of your shots might be really quick, short, and simple descriptions describing normal, common, everyday shots that you would expect in a scene, but having it written down helps you to make sure that you get the shots that you require. Sometimes though, there are specific needs or specific ideas that you have for a shot, and it's really important to write down those special elements. In some cases, I may just want to make sure that I get a wide master and a couple close-ups of each actor in the scene. Whether the camera is facing to the north side of the room or the west side of the room really doesn't matter to me. Whether the camera is facing out the window or out the door also may not matter in this particular context. And so in a case like that, my shot list can be super quick and simple and easy, and then on the day or during the tech survey ahead of time, we can discuss it with the DP and allow our discussion with the DP or the DP to even have a say as far as what's going to look best, as far as which direction we're looking or what we're seeing in the background. That's a bit oversimplified, but in its basic form, it's really just making sure that you get the coverage that you require to tell the story that you want to tell. And then in other circumstances, there might be a specific reason why you definitely want to make sure that this shot is facing to that side of the room, or why you're looking out the window or not looking out the window in this particular shot. So if you have a key story point and you want to make sure that you are looking a certain way or certain direction or seeing something in the background, be sure to include that in your shot list so that you don't forget it, and so that you and everyone else knows that there's a reason why we're looking that direction. For example, in a shot list for a scene, I might say that I want a wide master. That's pretty self-explanatory. I really may not care exactly what's happening in that wide master other than seeing the scene unfold. I also might want to make sure that I get a two-shot of two of the actors in the scene. I might write down a two-shot on my shot list, but I might not really care exactly what we're looking at in the background or what we're seeing around the actors, as long as I get a nice shot of the two actors together. I might also want some coverage on the actors, or a couple close-ups, medium close-up, a tight close-up, whatever I end up wanting. And again, I may not care too much about what's going on around it or where the shot's positioned. And so in many cases, when you don't really care too much about many of the details of the shot and you just want to make sure that you get the right coverage for the scene, it can actually be this simple, because you can work out the details on the day, reposition cameras a bit, reposition a few things in the set dressing a bit just to make things look even cooler and better on camera. But there might be other times where you definitely want to be very specific with your shot list, as far as, yes, I want a two-shot of the actors and they need to be facing this direction for whatever reason. You might have your blocking written down as part of your shot list as well, or there might be a very key story moment that you want to make sure you get across with a particular shot. And so your shot list can be as simple or as detailed as you want it to be, depending on what shot you're going for and how many details and specific story beats you have to try to cover with these shots. If you do have very specific details in your shot list, very specific directions that you want to look or things that you want to see in the background, do make sure that you share that shot list and share those details and that information with your AD and your DP ahead of time, and hopefully they're sharing that information with the other people involved or required to know that information, because that way you're going to make sure that you have all the elements necessary, or everyone's thinking through what's necessary to make that shot happen. For instance, if you want to make sure that you're looking a certain direction for a certain reason, then you should definitely make sure your DP and AD are aware of that either on or before the tech survey, so that they can make sure it's going to work out for them lighting-wise, grip-wise, and every other issue-wise. Any inserts that you want to make sure you get should also be on your shot list. In a recent short film that I directed called Marbles, 5.5 pages of the 6-page script were basically one long scene. I knew that I wanted to open the film with a close-up shot of a pie in the oven, so that shot was on my shot list. I knew that I then wanted to cut to a wider shot on a dolly, and I had a very specific camera move in mind that I wanted to do to follow the pie out of the oven into Mom's hands, follow Mom over to the counter as she sets down the pie, and then follow Mom around as she looks at the clock and then walks around to sit down at the counter. This was a complex move, and I marked it out on my shot list, as well as drew an overhead drawing with camera placement and the position of where the dolly and the camera moves. But because I shot listed that scene and went through the scene and prepped it properly, I also knew that after Mom sits down, I would never cut back to that shot in the entire 5.5 pages. However, I did know that I required coverage on Mom, and so if that shot could become her coverage for a particular angle that I was looking for, then that gives us 2 shots in one setup. In Marbles, I knew that I was going to continue to cover this scene pretty traditionally for the first page or so of this scene, but then there was a particular moment in time where Mom drops marbles on the table. We cut to a close-up of the marbles falling in slow-mo, which was also a shot or an insert on the shot list, and then at that point in the scene, we purposefully jump the line and cut to the other side of our axis line. From that point forward, I knew I wanted a couple wide shots from that side of the line covering the rest of the scene, and I also knew I needed a number of close-ups, coverage on each of the 4 actors, as well as many other specialty shots and inserts, which would make up a very complex visual effects sequence. I planned through the entire scene in my mind, making notes of every single shot that I wanted, and every single one of those shots and inserts ended up on my shot list. It was a very long shot list and a very ambitious shot list. In fact, when you look at just the scenes, we say 5.5 pages, sure, we can do that in one day. However, once you saw my shot list, that's when we knew we required 2 days to make this short film happen, because it was a very complicated and complex sequence which required a whole lot of shots. Way more shots and setups than we could possibly achieve in one day. If I hadn't shot listed that short film well in advance, then we may have ended up trying to shoot it all in one day and would have definitely been in trouble and would never have made our day. However, because I took the time to shot list ahead of time, I knew this was going to be a complex sequence that required 2 days to shoot 6 pages. I cannot tell you how many times I went through that scene, read the scene in the script, made notes every time I went through, listed out shots and ideas for shots every time I went through the scene, over and over again to make sure I had everything I needed. Once I had a pretty basic idea of my shot list, I also then went and shot a previs where I had the actor who was playing one of the main actors as well as a friend of his, and using those 2 actors in my kitchen with my DSLR, I shot all the shots that I had written out on my shot list, edited all together to make sure it was going to work properly. By doing that, it allowed me to figure out what shots I actually needed, how I had to tweak things to make it work better, and maybe there were 1 or 2 shots that I didn't think of that I realized I required. It's so much better to figure that out ahead of time with a previs with a couple actors in your kitchen and a DSLR than it is to get on set and shoot everything for real and then figure out weeks or months later in the editing room that you're missing something that you hadn't thought of. That is another reason why shot listing is very important. When you're shot listing, you should also include details such as what style or shooting mode are you currently in for each of these shots, or what is your camera on? Is it on a tripod, a Steadicam, a dolly? Are you making a move? Are you holding it static or stationary? Is it handheld? What sort of movement or shooting style or shooting mode do you want to be in for each of these shots? That is also important to specify on your shot list. On all of my projects, I usually have some sort of in-depth conversation with the DP ahead of time, and we usually come to a pretty mutual understanding that in almost all situations, the camera is always going to be on a dolly when practical or on a slider when a dolly is not feasible. Because of that, we also have a mutual understanding that just about every shot, regardless of what I specify in the shot list, is always going to have some sort of subtle movement or motion to it from a dolly or a slider. For that reason, because of that mutual understanding that we have and the discussions that we have ahead of time, I don't usually write out the movement or dolly or slider for every single shot because it's just assumed that that's a given and that it's going to happen unless I have something particular in mind that I want as far as what that move looks like or a very specific mode that I definitely want to make sure the camera's in for that shot. So instead of writing wide master on dolly or close-up coverage on slider, I'll just write wide master close-up coverage because it's just assumed that it's going to be on a dolly or a slider wherever feasible and possible. However, if you have not had those sorts of conversations with your DP, or if you're not used to working in that sort of way, then you should definitely specify dolly, slider, or whatever other camera mode as much as possible on your shot list just to make sure there's no confusion or misunderstanding. As an example, when I was filming No Internet, of course I wanted some subtle movement in just about every shot, and that was always a given that there would be some subtle dolly or slider action happening in just about every shot, but there were many times where I also wanted a very specific move or wanted to make sure the camera was in a very specific mode. In those situations, I did make sure that I marked on the shot list. For example, in one scene, I knew that as I went through it in my mind, I definitely wanted it to end on a two-shot of the actors pulling out into a wider shot of the two of them sitting on the character's bed. So I made sure that I included that specific move on my shot list to make sure that everyone's on the same page so that we don't forget it on the day. There are also a few places in No Internet as well as Identity where I did some cool transitions from one scene to another scene to the next scene. By pre-planning this and shot listing ahead of time, it gives you a written record of what direction the camera should be moving. Yes, you should be deciding which direction the camera is moving ahead of time so that it can be on your shot list, so that it's in everyone's hands, your scriptie's hands, your AD's hands, your DP's hands, so that everyone knows what direction things are moving for both sides of that transition. Otherwise, if you have them moving the wrong direction, it's not going to work in post. Scene ends with camera spinning clockwise into black. Scene opens with camera spinning clockwise out of black. Scene ends with camera sliding right to left into black. Scene opens with camera sliding right to left out of black. Camera slides left to right for the transition to each pair of eyes. Camera slides right to left out of black, revealing lockers and school hallway. Each of these require the camera moving in a specific direction for either the opening or closing shot of a scene, otherwise it would not have worked properly. Shot listing and pre-planning this ahead of time is what made it work. So if you've been following along with this season of Filmmaking for Noobs and you're planning on creating your next project at the end of this season or shortly after this season concludes, then now is a great time to do some homework and start shot listing your film. Thanks for watching Filmmaking for Noobs. I hope that this has helped you to figure out what a shot list is, why it's important, and how to go about shot listing or what's important to include on a shot list. If you have questions, be sure to leave those in the comments below. I'm happy to read and answer as many questions as I possibly can. I do read every comment that I receive. In another episode of Filmmaking for Noobs happening in just a couple weeks, we'll be talking about motion, how to add motion and movement to your shots, and what sorts of devices are available to you to really make the most out of adding motion and movement to your shots to give it some added levels of dynamics and to really help convey certain emotions or feelings to your audience. So be sure to check that out in a couple weeks when it is released. Once it is released, I will post a link to that episode in the description of this video as well. Thanks for liking, sharing, subscribing, tell your friends, watch more, I don't know, just thanks for watching. Come back next week for more.